Join me today as we pay our respects at our nation's most sacred shrine, Arlington National Cemetery. It is the final resting place of over 400,000 of America's military personnel and families, a number of Supreme Court justices, and 2 presidents. It is a must-see for student tours, and in this series I will show you the cemetery through this lens as we see what they see when I guide them. We will visit the graves of President John F. Kennedy and his brothers, see the changing of the guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier, spend time at the Memorial Amphitheater, investigate individual graves, and walk through its grounds. It is a magical space where even the most quiet of my student groups become filled with curiosity and questions, and I will share what I know with you as well as give a behind-the-scenes view of the trips. Take a look at the black sign on the way in, the one that says, "Conduct yourself with quiet dignity and respect at all times." Remember, these are hallowed grounds. Here is the back of the Memorial Amphitheater from a bit of a distance. A bit closer now. So here we are now at the inside of the Memorial Amphitheater, which I have been teasing to you since the intro of this series. It was built for Memorial Day ceremonies, which it is still used for. It is also used for Veterans Day ceremonies. And on a more practical day-to-day basis, it is used for tour guides like myself to bring their groups in and talk about what they just saw over at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, or possibly in advance beforehand. As you already know, I like to come here afterwards. We come through this entrance over here, and then I will bring them right around this area. Sometimes it is really sunny and hot, and if there's a shaded area, we will try and get that. Of course, a shaded area is in very high demand. Generally, though, I will get them seated right in this area, and then we will start talking. First, I will let them know that they don't have to be super quiet anymore. This is not a super quiet zone. And then I will ask them about what their impressions were about what they just saw. I will say, "How did it make you feel?" And they will say what they say. Sometimes they say proud, patriotic. Sometimes they'll say, "I was really tired. I really wanted to sit down." It really just depends. But then we will take a deeper dive into everything. I will tell them that the British and the French were the first ones to start a Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, both in Paris and London. And exactly 1 year later, we followed suit. So they started in 1920 on Armistice Day, which is November 11th. Now it is here in the US, it is called Veterans Day. And we basically followed their lead. And exactly 1 year later, we started the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier here. Now, originally, there was no guard. In Paris and London, to this day, there is no guard. There is just the tomb. But here we have a guard. And when we started it here, there was no guard either. So why do we have a guard here when these other countries don't? And even here in the US, we have a Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for the Revolutionary War in Philadelphia. Back behind Arlington House, as I mentioned before, there is a Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for about 2,000 Civil War veterans. There is no guard over there. So why do we need a guard? And I will ask my kids this question, just trying to get them to guess. And the answer is, it's actually pretty horrible. What happened was, when there was no guard, there were some disrespectful locals that thought it was an amazing place to have a picnic. And the view over there is spectacular, and it would be a great place to have a picnic if it wasn't what it is. So that was disrespectful in and of itself, to have picnics right there at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. What was even worse was that they would leave their garbage laying around, just total litter bugs. They would leave empty drink bottles and whatever else. So this really angered locals. And at first, something of a police force was instituted during cemetery opening hours. And later on in time, in the 1930s, this got transferred to the Army, and the Army made it 24 hours a day instead of just cemetery hours. And today, the tomb is guarded 24/7, and it does not matter how cold it gets or how hot it gets or what is happening. Right in the middle of the 9/11 attacks, the tomb was being guarded. There could be blizzards, anything. The tomb is always guarded. That's how important it is. I will also ask them if they think that it's easy. Is it easy being a tomb guard? I mean, all they do is walk back and forth, right? And nobody ever agrees with that. Nobody ever says, yes, it's easy. And of course, the answer is no, it's not easy at all. The tomb guards come from an Army base that is connected to the cemetery. It's called Fort Myer. They are the 3rd Infantry, and they only select the soldiers who have the best records with whatever they're being tested for over there to even be applicants. And then they go through this rigorous training process where the vast majority of them end up dropping out. I once took a tour of the Pentagon with one of my groups, and there was a 3rd Infantry soldier who was basically our tour guide. And he was telling us that most members of the 3rd Infantry do not want to be tomb guards, and that's because it requires such a level of dedication that it actually damages their relationships with their significant others or other things that they have going on in their lives, because so much is dedicated to the tomb. So the ones who do apply, they really have a lot of dedication, and then of course they have to meet these demanding tests. When they begin their training, they start in the basement of this Memorial Amphitheater. When this was originally built, they planned to have basically catacombs in the basement where they could keep the remains of some very notable individuals. But in the end, they scrapped that idea, but the space is still there. So they will train down there in the basement, and they will march back and forth, practicing their movements. When they are deemed well enough, they will get a shift in the middle of the night. Again, it is a 2-hour shift with no public audience. And then after that, they can get promoted to daytime shifts in front of the public. After 9 months of training, they receive an identification badge. And the tomb badge is pretty unique in that it is the only award in the US military that can be revoked. So if later on in life a retired tomb guard did something that would disgrace the military for whatever reason, they can take it back. Whereas other medals in the military, once you have it, that's yours for life, no matter what comes next. I will also ask them what they think the tomb guards are thinking about as they are marching back and forth. And I'll get a variety of answers from the kids. Sometimes they'll say honor or courage, or they're thinking about the sacrifice. Sometimes they'll say they're thinking about what they're gonna have for lunch. It could be anything, but every now and then there will be a student who gets the answer correct and says they're counting. And that is what's going on. They are counting. They're counting to the number 21 over and over again. Everything about the timing and coordination is about the number 21. And a 21 gun salute at a funeral is the ultimate show of respect, and that's how they feel about the unknown soldier. Everything is about maximum levels of respect. So they will take 21 steps, which take 21 seconds, turn and face the tomb for 21 seconds. Everything is based on 21. On a practical level, this is what keeps them synchronized with each other. Now, this entire time we've been talking about the tomb as if there is one unknown soldier. And there used to be. The very large tomb in the center is a World War I unknown. But later on in time, of course, there were more wars and more unknowns were added. So on the far left, on the ground, there is a crypt for a Korean War unknown. On the far right is a crypt for a World War II unknown, and in the center is a crypt for a Vietnam unknown. So there used to be 4 unknowns. However, now there are 3 because the Vietnam War unknown has been identified. There was only 1 unknown at the time, and this person's family suspected that it was their loved one, and they requested for the tomb to be exhumed, and it eventually was. And they did DNA testing on him and discovered that they were correct. This was their loved one. He was an Air Force captain named Michael Blassie from St. Louis, and now he rests in a national cemetery in St. Louis. So the crypt is empty and it will stay empty. And with DNA testing what it is, and especially since new recruits get swabbed when they enter, their DNA is already on file, there probably will not be any more unidentifieds moving forward. So there will be no more spaces created here for unknowns from future wars. As I mentioned earlier on, it's very important for friends and family members to be able to find closure by coming to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, because maybe that person inside one of those crypts is their loved one. And keeping that in mind, I wanted to tell you something about how the World War II unknown was chosen. As we all know, World War II was fought both in Europe and Asia. So if you had an unknown who came from the European theater, for example, and had them be the unknown, if you had a family member for someone who went missing in the Philippines, for example, they would know for a fact that the unknown soldier is not their loved one. And theoretically, it would not bring them the same level of closure as someone who lost their loved one in Europe, where this could be their loved one. So what they did was they purposely chose unknowns from both the European theater and the Asian theater, and they put them in identical caskets and mixed them up so that no one would ever know which was which. And then one of those two was chosen, and to this day, no one knows where that unknown came from. And again, it was done very intentionally so that it could be from anywhere and could be anyone's loved one there. So there have been 7 female tomb guards. The first one came on back in the 1990s. And it's always really awesome when the kids get to see a female tomb guard here. Most of the time it's guys, but every now and then there will be a female guard. And there was once where we came here and the inspection was between 2 women. And that was really awesome to see. That was the only time I've ever seen that.